Before the Vikings, before the 9 realms settled into the shapes we know, the cosmos was divided. 2 great families of gods existed in a fragile peace. One was a tribe of warriors, rulers and builders living in a fortress of celestial gold. The other was a tribe of mystics, masters of nature and primal magic, living in a realm of untamed wilderness. They were the 𝐼sir and the Vanir. For a long time they kept their distance, but that was about to change. It all started when a mysterious sorceress walked into the heart of the gods' domain, offering wonders beyond imagination. An act of unthinkable cruelty would follow, an act that plunged the heavens into chaos and lit the fires of the first and most devastating war in divine history. They speared her. They burned her in their great hall, and when she emerged from the flames, whole and reborn, they burned her again. The gods of Asgard made a fatal mistake when they brutalized the sorceress Gullveig, a mistake that would ignite a cosmic war. But what could drive the gods to such brutality? And how did one act of cruelty push 2 divine tribes into a war that would reshape their world forever? The 2 tribes of divinity. To understand the cataclysm to come, you have to understand the world as it was. The gods didn't all belong to one big, happy family. There were 2 distinct and powerful tribes, each with its own realm, its own values, and its own way of doing things. First you had the 𝐼sir living in the mighty fortress city of Asgard. It was a realm of breathtaking halls, impossible architecture, and the legendary rainbow bridge, Bifrost, that connected them to the mortal world. The 𝐼sir were gods of order, structure, war, and law. Think of them as the architects of society and the guardians of cosmic stability. At their head sat Odin, the All-Father. He was a complicated god, a king, a warrior, a poet, but above all, a relentless seeker of knowledge. He was the god of wisdom, but also of battle fury. He was a lawmaker, but wasn't above using a little deception to get what he wanted. Odin's great obsession was holding off Ragnarok, the prophesied end of the world. Every secret he learned, every plan he made, was aimed at that one desperate goal. He embodied the 𝐼sir's core drive to impose order on a chaotic universe. By his side stood other heavy hitters. There was his son, Thor, the god of thunder, whose hammer Mjolnir protected gods and mortals from the giants of Jotunheim. Thor was the champion of the 𝐼sir, strong, direct, and always ready for a fight. Then there was Tyr, the one-handed god of law and heroic glory, a deity so committed to an oath that he once sacrificed his own hand to bind the monstrous wolf Fenrir. The 𝐼sir valued honor, loyalty, and the rule of law. They were the celestial aristocracy who saw themselves as the rightful rulers of the cosmos. And then there were the Vanir. Their home, Vanaheim, was a world away from the gleaming spires of Asgard. Vanaheim was a realm of deep forests, fertile fields, and wild coasts, a place tied to the cycles of nature. The Vanir were gods of fertility, prosperity, and peace. Where the 𝐼sir built walls, the Vanir cultivated gardens. Their key figures were gods of life and abundance. There was Njord, the god of the sea, the wind, and the wealth brought by a good catch. He was a peaceful god who could calm the raging seas. He had 2 children who would become even more famous, the twins, Freya and Freya. Freya was the god of sunshine, gentle rain, and bountiful harvests. His sister Freya was an incredibly complex and powerful goddess. She was the goddess of love and beauty, but also a fierce warrior who claimed half of all heroes, slain in battle for her hall, Folkvanger. But most importantly, Freyja was the master of a unique and powerful form of magic, an art that belonged to the Vanir. This magic was called 𝐸𝐫𝐫. It wasn't about runes or chanted spells like Odin's magic. It was a shamanic tradition, a way of entering a trance to talk to spirits, see the future and even shape it. A master of 𝐸𝐸𝐫 could weave new threads into the tapestry of fate, bringing blessings or curses, fortune or ruin. It was a power that dealt with destiny itself, and those who didn't understand it viewed it with a mix of awe and suspicion. And it was Freyja, some say, who first brought this knowledge to the gods. For a long time, these two tribes kept to themselves. They were two sides of the same cosmic coin, the structured, warlike Æsir and the natural, magical Vanir. A balance existed, but it was about to be shattered. The spark that would light the inferno was on its way to Asgard, cloaked in mystery and radiating a dangerous allure. The coming of the golden sorceress into this world of divided gods walked a mysterious and powerful figure. She came to Asgard not with an army, but as a lone wanderer named Gullveig. Her name in Old Norse was a riddle. Gull means gold. Veig can mean strength or even an intoxicating drink. She was gold power, or maybe more accurately, gold drunkenness, a being who personified the corrupting allure of wealth. Gullveig was a Vanir sorceress, a master of 𝐸𝐸𝐫. Now, many scholars believe that Gullveig wasn't a separate goddess at all, but was actually an avatar of the Vanir goddess Freyja herself, traveling under a different name. Whether she was Freyja in disguise or another powerful witch, her effect on the Æsir was the same. She came to Odin's halls and began to practice her magic, and the Æsir were captivated. Here was a power totally unlike their own. Their strength was in their swords and spears. Gullveig's power was subtle, insidious, and it promised them the one thing even gods crave, more. Through her magic, she seemed to be able to generate endless wealth. She spoke of gold, she lived for gold, and her magic bent the world toward getting it. At first the Æsir, the 𝐽𝐿𝐴𝐴𝐴 sought her services, hoping she could magically solve their problems, but slowly an unease began to creep through Asgard. Gullveig's magic was having a corrupting influence. The core values of the Æsir, honor, loyalty, law, started to fray. As they chased the personal gains she promised, they began to neglect their duties. Greed, the very thing her name suggested, festered in their hearts. Odin and the other leaders watched this decay with growing alarm. They saw their orderly world unraveling, threatened not by a giant's club, but by the whispers of a sorceress. They started to see Gullveig not as a guest, but as a spy sent by the Vanir to undermine them from within. Her magic, once fascinating, was now seen as a dangerous and deceptive art, unworthy of true warriors. This fear curdled into blame. Instead of facing their own greed that Gullveig's presence had exposed, the Æsir turned on her. In their eyes, she was the poison that needed to be purged. The decision was made. This foreign influence had to be destroyed. In Odin's great hall, they resolved to make an example of her and the chaotic magic she represented. They thought they were purging a sickness. In reality, they were lighting a fuse. The threefold fire of war. The atmosphere in Odin's great hall was grim. The Æsir had judged the Vanir sorceress Gullveig, and her sentence was death They wouldn't just banish her, they would utterly destroy her. Cleansing Asgard with spear and flame, they seized her. The warrior gods surrounded the lone witch and drove their spears into her. But Gullveig was a mistress of cedar, and their blades couldn't extinguish her life force so easily. Her resilience only fueled their fury. If steel wouldn't work, fire would. In the center of the hall, they cast her speared body into the hearth fire. The flames roared, consuming her. The Æsir watched, confident their brutal work was done, but as the fire died down, something impossible happened. From the ashes, Gullveig rose, completely unharmed. She was reborn from the very fire meant to destroy her. The Æsir stared in disbelief and horror. Their fear intensified into panic. This was no mere sorceress. This was something far more powerful than they had imagined. Their response wasn't to reconsider, but to double down. If one fire wasn't enough, another would be. They seized her again, their grips now laced with desperation. And, for a second time, they threw her into the flames. And again she emerged from the ashes, reborn and defiant. The experience was changing her. With each fiery rebirth, she became something more. She was now also known as 𝐦𝐫𝐷r, the Shining One, a name that suggested both the gleam of gold and the clarity of a great seer. The Æsir, driven by a mix of terror and rage, refused to accept this. Their authority was being challenged by this indestructible woman. So, they committed the same atrocity a third time. They speared her. They cast her into the fire, and for a third time she lived. Thrice burned and thrice born, Gullveig now fully realized as the seeress 𝐦𝐸𝐷r stood before them, a testament to the futility of their violence. This act of repeated torture was the point of no return. News of what had happened in Asgard, the triple burning of a Vanir woman, reached Vanaheim. If Gullveig truly was Freyja, then the Æsir had just tried to murder the sister of the Vanir's most beloved god. Even if she wasn't, she was one of their own, brutalized for practicing their sacred magic. The reaction in Vanaheim was incandescent rage. This was an attack on their entire way of life. The Æsir had shown that they saw Vanir magic as something to be violently purged. There could be only one response. The Vanir gathered their strength. They would have justice. They declared war. The first war in the history of the cosmos had begun. A war of might versus magic. The Vanir's declaration of war shook the 9 realms. For the first time, gods would fight gods. The Æsir, secure in Asgard, prepared for the assault. This was a language they understood. In the first great battle, Odin hurled his spear, Gungnir, over the heads of the Vanir army, crying out, "Odin owns you all." It was the formal start of hostilities, a ritual claim of victory before the first blood was even shed. The Æsir charged with their full martial might. Thor's hammer cracked across the battlefield, shattering the earth. Tyr led the armies with brilliant strategy. They were a force of pure, overwhelming power. But the Vanir met the Æsir's might with a power they had fatally underestimated: magic. The sagas don't give us a play-by-play of the battles, but you can imagine the scene. While the Æsir focused on breaking bodies, the Vanir focused on breaking minds and the land itself. Their sorcerers wove spells that could crumble Asgard's walls, call down unnatural storms, or cast illusions that made the Æsir turn on their own brothers. It was a devastating clash of 2 completely different ways of fighting. The Æsir would advance in a disciplined shield wall, only to have the ground beneath them turn to mud. Thor would strike down a dozen Vanir, only for 100 more to seemingly rise from the earth. The war was long, brutal, and ruinous for both sides. Neither could gain an advantage. The Æsir's strength was undermined by Vanir magic, and Vanir magic was met with the unbreakable resilience of the Æsir warriors. The gods, who were meant to be the protectors of the 9 realms, were now its greatest destroyers. They saw their homes ravaged and their kin slain. The fury that started the war faded into weary exhaustion. It became clear that continuing the fight would mean mutual destruction, leaving the realms defenseless against their true enemies, the giants. They finally understood that there could be no victory. The only path forward was peace. The stalemate and the truce. The fires of war finally dwindled. The gods of Asgard and Vanaheim looked at the devastation they had caused and saw only a shared, profound loss. Weary of the fight, they agreed to meet and end the war. To seal their truce, they decided to exchange hostages. This was a sacred bond. High-ranking members of each tribe would go live with their former enemies. Their safety would be a living guarantee of the peace. If either side broke the truce, they'd be killing their own people. The Vanir sent 3 of their most important gods to Asgard. They sent Njord, the patriarch of their tribe, and his 2 children, Freyr and Freya. Remember, it was Freya's avatar Gullveig who may have started the whole war. By sending her, the Vanir were showing immense trust. In return, the Æsir sent 2 hostages to Vanaheim. The first was a god named Honir, who was tall, handsome, and looked every bit the leader. The second was a being of immense wisdom, Mimir, the Rememberer, a wellspring of ancient knowledge. By sending their wisest being, the Æsir seemed to be matching the Vanir's gesture of goodwill. The exchange was made. A fragile peace settled over the realms. The war was over, but the aftermath would prove to be just as dangerous as the war itself. A tragic misunderstanding was about to lead to a second, horrifying act of brutality and threaten to shatter the peace before it could even begin. A peace tested by betrayal. In Asgard, the integration went surprisingly well. Njord, Freyr, and Freya were welcomed and given high honors. Freya, the mistress of Seder, began to teach the art to her former enemies. The most famous and powerful of her students was Odin himself. The magic that had once been a source of fear was now being woven into Æsir society. In Vanaheim, however, things weren't going so smoothly. The Vanir had immediately made the handsome Honir their new chieftain. They would come to him for judgment on important matters, and as long as Mimir was by his side, Honir offered wise and decisive counsel. The Vanir were impressed, but if Mimir was absent, Honir's demeanor changed completely. He became evasive and indecisive. To any question put to him, he would give the same frustrating answer. Let others decide. It didn't take long for the Vanir to figure it out. Honir wasn't a wise leader at all. He was a figurehead with no capacity for judgment of his own. All his wisdom came directly from Mimir. The Vanir felt cheated. They had sent 3 of their most powerful gods to Asgard. In return, the Æsir had sent them one truly wise being and an incompetent fool. It felt like a deliberate insult. Their anger began to simmer once again, their fury focused on the source of the council, Mimir. In a shocking act of rage, the Vanir seized the wise god. They believed that by getting rid of Mimir they would expose Honir's incompetence to everyone. Their method was swift and brutal. They beheaded Mimir, but they weren't done. To send a clear and horrifying message back to Asgard, they send the severed head of Mimir back to Odin. This was a moment of supreme crisis. The peace treaty had been violated in the most gruesome way. The head of an Æsir hostage had just been delivered to the All-Father. This act could have easily reignited the war. The fate of the 9 realms hung in the balance, resting entirely on how Odin would respond. Wisdom from a severed head. The severed head of Mimir arrived in Asgard as a grim, bloody message. It was an act of profound disrespect that threatened to unravel the fragile peace. A lesser leader might have responded with immediate force, plunging both tribes back into a mutually destructive war. But Odin wasn't a lesser leader. He was the god of wisdom, and he understood the stakes. He saw past the horror of the act to the tragic misunderstanding that caused it. Instead of retaliating, Odin chose a path of magic and preservation. He took Mimir's head. To Odin, it was a vessel containing an irreplaceable treasure, Mimir's infinite knowledge. He couldn't bear to lose that, so he took the head to a sacred place and worked his magic. He spoke secret, runic charms over it, and through his incantations, he preserved the head not just as a physical object, but as a conscious, speaking oracle. He had saved Mimir's consciousness from the finality of death. From that day on, the severed head of Mimir became one of Odin's most trusted counselors. In times of great need, Odin would consult the head, and Mimir's disembodied voice would offer guidance and prophecy. Odin took an act of violent betrayal and transformed it into a perpetual source of wisdom. This incredible foresight averted a second great war and solidified the peace. The stories of the Norse gods are filled with these incredible moments of conflict, magic, and strange transformations. These myths are more than just old tales. They're complex stories about power, sacrifice, and the struggle for wisdom. If you're finding this journey into the divine war as fascinating as we are, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell for notifications. We have many more trips to take through the 9 realms, and let us know in the comments, why do you think the Æsir truly feared Gullveig's magic? Was it just greed, or was it something deeper? We love reading your theories. The birth of Kvasir and a new pantheon. With the crisis of Mimir's head averted, the gods knew they needed one final, ultimate act to seal their truce. They gathered in a great assembly, brought forth a single large vat, and one by one, every god from both tribes, Æsir and Vanir alike, came forward and spat into it. This might sound strange, but it was a deeply symbolic ritual. Saliva was seen as carrying a person's essence and knowledge. By mingling their saliva, they were mingling their very beings. And from this combined essence, the gods shaped a new being. His name was Kvasir. Born from the spirit of every god, Kvasir was the wisest being in all of existence. There was no question he couldn't answer, no riddle he couldn't solve. He was the living embodiment of the harmony and combined wisdom of the 2 pantheons. His story would eventually end in tragedy. He was later murdered by 2 dwarves who coveted his wisdom. They brewed his blood with honey to create the legendary Mead of poetry. a magical drink that granted sublime inspiration to anyone who drank it. So, even in death, 𝐾𝐨𝐴𝐺's essence, the wisdom born from unity, became the source of all poetry in the Norse world. The Æsir Vanir war was over, the conflict that began with the burning of a goddess and was nearly reignited by a beheading had finally ended in a lasting peace. The result wasn't a conquest, but a merger. The Norse pantheon as we know it was formed from this union. Gods like Freyr and Freya became central figures worshipped alongside Odin and Thor. The different values of the two tribes, the martial order of the Æsir and the natural magic of the Vanir, were integrated. The war, born of fear and brutality, had ultimately forced the gods to reconcile their differences and forge a new, stronger reality, reminding us that even from the most devastating conflicts, unity and wisdom can eventually be born.